Welcome back to Where Are All My Friends? This is a very unique and very cool episode. It is with Josh Madden, who is very behind the scenes in a very cool way. He was a big piece of the come up of Good Charlotte with his brothers Benji and Joel, but he's a pretty low-key kind of guy. He doesn't ever like to make the conversation about himself, and I've always been intrigued by him. I've always very much respected him, and I hit him up to do the podcast, and he challenged me with an idea and suggested a different format that I loved. And that's what this episode is. It's a super quick phone call where he didn't want to talk about himself. He just wanted to share one idea and give people a thought to hopefully change the way they think and inspire a little bit of positivity. So we just took this one very specific subject. He shared this one thought and wanted to leave everyone with just that. So give it a listen and let me know if you like short episodes like this, because we might just have to have him back on for some more of them. Enjoy. Josh Madden, what's good, my guy?
A lot. I appreciate you having me on, and I think, thanks for considering something a little different than your typical MO. But in this 5 minutes, and I just set my timer for 5 minutes because I will talk longer, but I want to get you on with your day, and I want to kind of like not take up time on your listeners. We want to keep them in consideration of this thought. And I'd love to do this as frequently as you'd have me, but seeing this morning about, as I was riding around listening to music, I listen to the radio sometimes, and all this music from the 90s is on the radio right now, and everybody's, the style is the 90s, and everybody's reflecting on the 90s and this and that. And I heard the Interrupters, and I realized, man, I like the Interrupters, and they remind me so much. You can hear Rancid, and you can hear so much in the Interrupters. And I started thinking about how they're in the past going to Warped Tour and festivals. And I heard something this week of an artist talking about another artist, and this sort of like the age old thing of like what's real and what's good and what's not. And I if I could say anything to us as a music community right now, the younger generation, the existing generation, it's that it really doesn't, these conversations of what's real or what we understand or what's better than the other thing, it really doesn't matter in 5 to 10 years. So I was a kid riding to Warped Tour, listening to Operation Ivy and Rancid and NoFX, and I had my own judgments of like what was good or what was bad or what was pop or what was not. And as I got older, I was around all these bands. I went to TRL and I went to award shows and I saw festivals and I saw all the bands interact, and I saw that like, oh wow, like, people stood on the divide of like, oh, Linkin Park is like that, and Green Day is like that, and Third Eye Blind's over here, and this is that, and Foo Fighters aren't as good as Nirvana, and this and that. And I'm like, now as an older person, I look at things and I'm like, wow, I wonder if anyone ever had that conversation about Big Audio Dynamite. Because Big Audio Dynamite is effectively the Foo Fighters. They came from the Clash. They were a little different, this and that. And the Clash was one thing, and Big Audio Dynamite was another. If you don't know what that is, check it out. But it's Mick from the Clash. But the thing is, I think these conversations are just cyclical. And I think that like 20 years later, you listen to a 90s station and it's all together. 20 years later, you go to a 90s party or a scene-related party, and people are playing it all together. There's Third Eye Blind, and there's Green Day, and there's Blink-182, and all these bands in one place. Limp Bizkit. And it's this interesting thing where when I heard this conversation this week, it was kind of heavy. I wouldn't say heavy on my heart. It was heavy on my mind, where I was like, man, I wish that I could sort of like get in this divide with these kids, with these younger people, and sort of say like, yo, in 10, 20 years, you're going to look back at like at this and be like, I can't believe, because as some kid somewhere today is riding to a festival or to a show, and they're arguing about the Interrupters versus a band. And it's like, I think in this day and age, like, we're better off, especially where rock and roll is coming back into view, right? So rock and roll has been nowhere near anyone's viewpoint, anywhere on the horizon for the last bunch of years. And now there's all kinds of rock and roll. There's this conversation of like, oh, like this is not, and this is, and that's not, I want other people to have this conversation, but I really want people to like, as we hear bands cover Goo Goo Dolls, and bands cover, Third Eye Blind or this or that, like, I want people to know that like at one point, whatever people are saying isn't real or whatever this or that, At one point, those bands were that. And I think now where everybody can listen to anything because they have Apple Music or Spotify, I think the conversation of where the value is, the different groups of people that like this music and why. And I think as rock and roll, and as like there's all this new generation of kids, Willow Smith and boy band and all these kids, rappers are making pop punk and pop punkers are making beats and this and that. I think we really have to kind of like back away from this conversation of separation. I think what we have to do though is really like look and say like, look, in 10 years, do you really want to tie yourself to the mast of that ship? You really want to go out and argue against other people? Is it really that valuable? Because I was just talking to someone this morning and I was like, talking about this very thing. And I was like, you're going to end up out in Australia and you're going to catch the last cab back from town because you missed your bus. And there's going to be another person from another band. And you're not really going to give a fuck about their music. You're not going to fucking care. You're not going to fucking care in 10 years. Like what's really going to happen is you're going to end up somewhere in an airport lounge in another country. You're going to see someone from some pop band or rapper or this or that or something. Are you going to fucking not go over to them and say, what's up, or not like be friendly? Or you not like, you're better off moving together and not moving further apart. And you and the musicians, they have the voice, they have the platform to bring the fans and the people together or to separate them. Guess what? In 20 years, they're covering Olivia Rodrigo, So the argument is dead in 20 years. You're better off just looking at people and seeing it. And you're better off not having the argument of what's real or what's true because cred is dead.
You're so right. It's just like, it feels like this reminder to zoom out and just fucking create. Like, stop paying attention to the other shit, zoom out, create, and support other creators, right?
Yeah, and it shouldn't be reserved. If all the artists could just give a little bit less of a fuck, we're better off if we stop moving apart and we start realizing that like somewhere, somebody today is discovering the Interrupters and that's their Rancid, and some other kid is discovering another band and that's their favorite band. We're better off not separating. We're better off keeping it together. Everybody laments the Warped Tour. Everybody's like, oh, we'll never have another Warped Tour. Well, we can, or we can have 10 Warped Tours. But we have to realize that everyone pines for the days when Warped Tour was good. Well, the days that Warped Tour were good, I was there. And I'll tell you what, everybody was divided about, whether you like AFI or Gym Class Heroes. Guess what? We all like them all now, So that's the thing.
So
you can't pine for something. You can't pine for something. You have to make it that. But what I'm saying is like, there's always going to be someone pointing out, this thing, and there's always going to be another person. And to the artists that are out there having these little squabbles, let me tell you, you regret it in 10 years. So squash that shit and get on with it. We're just way better off being together than picking each other apart.
I love that so much. And in my head, I'm like, damn, we might have just invented a new installment where it's just a call and a check-in with one topic and one thought with Josh. But this shit was powerful.
I think you should do it with everybody. But I think the prerequisite the prerequisite needs to be that it's positive, because I think there's enough negative stuff to talk about in the world that we don't really need to discuss. Like any argument that's dead 20 years later isn't worth it.
That's such a good reminder, dude. That's so sick.
I hope that like any of your people that listen to your podcast or any people that come in contact with you, you've always been really your presence in what I've experienced of saying hello to you and passing stuff has always been positive. And I think like I would like for this next generation that's coming up with all this stuff that's going on, like there's going to be a new version of everything, I think, in the next 5 years. And I think if someone came from TikTok or YouTube or they got signed to Epitaph, like it's cool. It's all good. It's all good. Everybody's got a fan base that supports them, and everybody, it's not worth arguing about like, let's just keep it moving and keep it positive. And if there's some negativity or some evil going on, people hurting people, discrimination, that's where we need to focus the the energy to get rid of that stuff. But like, if it's about music or legitimacy, come on.
Yeah, dude, that's such a good reminder, and that's everything I want to share on. That's the whole point of this podcast, is to make it a better place. So you just put that thought in such a good, well stated way that I love it.
Awesome, man. Well, have a good day. I hope everybody that hears this has a good day. I'll check back in with you in a week.
Yeah, I'm serious. I would love to do more of this with you. This was so cool. And I love, like, for the listener, like, legitimately, we called for like 2 minutes before this. And Josh was like, I have this idea. I don't want to make it formal. I don't want to do anything. Like, legit, we just called back. I hit record. I recorded the call on my computer, and like, that's it. So like, this was really fun and really honest and really off the top in the best way. So like, thank you for being down and challenging the format and keeping it real on a whole other level, man.
Cool, man. Have a good rest of the day, and I'll talk to you in a week.